Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So I'm really excited to be in this session because it's a chance for us to talk about work I'm very, very excited about. And we have some expertise, not just on the panel, but also in the audience with you. So we will try, the format of our panel will be to have each speaker hold to 10 minutes so that we have plenty of time for discussion. So if you see me doing this to them, you should all help me and make this gesture so that they'll leave the stage. The context for this is we really wanted to start a conversation to think about what would it mean for crowdsourcing to take seriously the premise that humans are such a core part of human computation, but arguably they're not visible to us often in the system. And perhaps in some ways we ask them to remain silent because for many systems the goal is that they're making our automation seamless and to feel as though it is fully automated as opposed to semi-automated with some help. So for this panel, we're going to have different speakers speak to different areas of crowdsourcing to think through this question, not just the ethics, but also the pragmatics of what it means to take advantage of the opportunities of workers who are coming to these systems for different motivations. Maybe they're volunteering, maybe they are seeking employment, but to really think through their motivations and how we might get a better sense of that. I'm going to have each of the speakers come up one by one. Our first speaker is going to be Rajesh Patel. I'll have them introduce themselves, and I'll put their deck up. So we'll do a little bit of jumping back and forth. But I'll pass this on to Rajesh now and bring up his deck.
All right. Thank you, Mary, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm very excited to be here and to share something and also learn along the way. As Mary said, I'm Rajesh Patel. I work in Bing and Microsoft, and I work on building platforms for machine learning and big data. One of my passion is to create platform to enable users improve their productivity by 10x. And also I have a dream that anything you can outsource can be cloud source. So our business need, what are our business need? We need repeated, high quality, high volume data every day. And here high quality, high volume, and timely is very important because we rely on these data to train our machine learning algorithm or measure the algorithm. And also we have many business cases. For example, training the voice model or training the search algorithm. And these are some of the examples that we use also survey or Bing A/B and side by side. So when Mary asked me that, okay, to take participation in this panel, I created this slide deck to stimulate some thoughts. So this is not a exhaustive list, but along the way, I would like to stimulate some thoughts in little bit some areas and also where we touch crowd as well as what we think next future is. So learning few nuggets, we'll talk about worker and what is important for worker. From worker perspective, what is important, from task owner perspective, what is important, as well as from platform developers like me, what is important. We'll cover on what is important from worker perspective. So let me cover what is important from requester perspective, what we see every day. So crowdsourcing, in order for crowdsourcing to be successful, you need to iterate your task and you need to design your HITAP or task design such a way that it's very suitable for this virtual workforce or workforce in the cloud. So crowdsourcing UI design is an art today because you need to get a couple of iterations to get it right. So, and one thing what we have observed is hit-app owner or task owner do not want to care about or do not want to invest or may not have expertise or interest to learn how to design tasks. What they care about is give me data so that I can go off and to fine-tune my machine learning model. Give me data so that I can go off and do analysis. So this is very important point which I have seen most of the people miss, that task owner do not care about how do I create or UI or what are the processes, but they care about data. Give me data, give me good quality data which I can trust, right? This is important. From platform perspective, things which are important is trust, worker quality, and we can trust the data, and we'll talk about marketplace dynamics today, as well as performance and scalability of platform is very important. As you scale your platform to this massively many workers on internet, how you scale, at the same time what is the performance on worker side as well as what is the performance on the task owner side as they are simultaneously uploading millions of tasks. And security, privacy, as well as legal implications about payment, co-employment are some of the issues from platform perspective. So what is important is circle of trust. Crowdsourcing, many people come to me and ask that, oh, I'm putting my work on internet or giving it to crowd. Will they give me good quality work? Because fundamentally, you and I are trained, or as we grew up, we had a concept crowd. Crowd means it's a group of people, they all are the same, there is no quality concept. Will they give me work, good quality work or not? So these are the questions people ask, and they don't have a trust on worker. From worker perspective, since we call them crowd, there is no name, they have a trust issue that should I trust you as a task owner? Will you give me my payment? If I'm willing to put my work, but will you give me payment? How platform will behave? Will it give me accurate hours? Is billing information is accurate? Will I be cheated? How do I associate myself? What is my sense of pride if I work in a crowd? Because crowd has no name, right? So there is a trust. Then from a task owner perspective, as I mentioned, that task owner, traditionally we are not trained to trust crowd because crowd has no name, no shape, no expectation, no SLA. So how do you trust crowd? How do you build trust into crowd's work so that crowd will provide you quality results? From platform perspective, you want to see that I want to trust crowd as well as I want to trust task owner, because I want to trust crowd so that they don't game the system. When I ask information of self-reported profile, they enter the right profile or accurate profile. How do I validate self-reported information by a user on internet? There is no unique ID or identification across multiple platforms, across multiple nations. There is no ID. A worker can game the system. They can create another account and then they can game the system again if you disable in one. It's a constant, it's like a virus scanner, I call it. That spam detection is like a virus scanner. Humans are very smart. You need to constantly reinvent the mechanism to fix the hole in the spam detection. So how, from a platform perspective, build a trust with worker as well as with task owner. So in this, so traditionally we all are trained to design a work or conceive a work. So when you have a work in mind, you have a person in mind. So for example, when I have a work in mind, I have a Matt in mind. That okay, you know what? I'm going to give this work to Matt, and this Matt is I'm going to train Matt, and Matt is going to do this work like this, right? So there is a trust there, right? And traditionally, as work increases, I'll hire multiple people, local people, physical resources, and that's how we are all trained, right? With Matt, there is a face, there is a reputation, there is a loyalty, there is a profile. which is authenticated, which is accurate, which I trust in, or historically I've grown to have a trust in them. But as task increases and I want to scale, I want to increase my agility, right? We are all well connected than ever before. I want to utilize the resources and expert in the internet. So how do I do that? So we use cloud, folks in the cloud. And notice that I'm not using crowdwork because I don't want to make them anonymous. Right now, all these faces in the cloud are anonymous and there is no association. And there is no advantage which I get with Matt. We always say, oh, I want to put a name with the face. I want to do face-to-face meeting. Because traditionally, we are all trained to create work and conceive work and think about work for a physical resources. This is different. This is about thinking a work for a virtual resources. And that's where majority of task owners fail to understand and design the processes and techniques to get the high quality work. Right? But in the cloud, there can be Matt as well. Right? And I have experience working with Matt, so why not I work with Matt in cloud? Why I call it crowd? Right? That's the paradigm shift, right? And there can be Joe, which I always work with. And then everything changes, start changing, and your effort changes, and quality changes. Another point I want to share with you, which I have seen, and people come to me, is I've seen on the platform worthless wandering of workers. Because traditionally, over the last 100 years of industrialization, we are trained when somebody has created task for us, they have created roadmap for us, right? But in crowdsourcing or cloud sourcing, if you give access to me in a marketplace, there are n possibilities. So if I leave you in a desert, how many directions you have to go? There are n directions you have, right? And most of the people will try small direction and they will fail and they will get tired because, oh, I don't know what to do. They will try every task. If you see any platform out there, most of the majority of worker will try every task, very small. But as you have learned, rolling stone do not gather moss. Similarly, they don't gather any expertise, and then they give up, right? So they try multiple options. There is no roadmap. There is no sense of shelter. There is no sense of guidance. So there is no way out for me. This is not the work for me because I'm a crowd, because I'm a faceless. And sometimes because of this, they do random actions. Because I have no face, I am a crowd, I have nothing to lose, and I can spam, right? I can behave unpredictable many times. Or some people find their way as well. But so I'll show you in the next slide. But what do we need as a platform is a stickiness of users or workers, right? We want them to work long hours. We want them to work as per the task owner's guideline, and we want them to provide quality judgments or quality. We call it judgment or quality input, right? That's the intention. So there are many type of worker. You cannot call crowd because crowd has no name, no face, no color. But if you want to do a better task assignment, you have to understand what kind of type of workers are there. Some workers who has figured it out in a direction, so they will come and work on one particular task, and they are consistent single task worker. There are some worker who are consistent, but they like to do multiple tasks. Right? There is no good or bad method. Some people say, oh, I want one worker to work on one task, so that they build the mental muscle and they build the accuracy. And there are some research which suggests, well, I do want worker to work on multiple tasks, so there is a context switching, so there is a avoidance of fatigue. But it's based on the worker choice. There are different kind of workers, and they have different way of working style, and they have different choices. There are sporadic workers and transient worker who come and go, and they try multiple tasks and then they go. So another point I want to make here in marketplace dynamics is there is a delicate balance as a platform owner. As you grow your marketplace, there is a delicate balance between number of workers and then number of tasks. Those who have curated or groomed marketplace, they will know the challenge that when you are bringing or making a marketplace, these are very delicate balance, because if you have many number of tasks but less worker, your task will starve. So there is immediately response of the task owner is to increase price. But in an enterprise environment, if you keep increasing the price, then it will cascade the whole price and your enterprise lose. If you increase the number of workers but there is a less task, what happens? Worker don't feel that it's value of my time, and there is no worth of my time, there is no good earning potential, they will go away. Good quality people will go away. At the same time, another thing may happen, which that there are more workers, less tasks, so people try to rush, and there is a quality suffers. So marketplace dynamics is very critical and very sensitive subject. You have to balance, we constantly balance number of workers and number of tasks so that we create the healthy marketplace. Many people ask me that how many workers you have, or we have 10,000 workers, we have 100,000 workers, we have million workers. Number of workers really don't care, matter here. How many active worker you have, how many worker provides good quality, and how many workers provide or follow the guideline and provide the quality. So future, there are 7+ billion people in the world. We have tremendous opportunity to tap into this massively growing, well-connected resource pool, so that any task you have, there is an expert out there, and you can assign. So opportunity I see is that matching the people skill with the task, and then at a scale, high scale, and that's an opportunity and research area. I would like to give it to you. It would be wonderful to have people earn money without employment. That would be another opportunity. But imagine a world where any task you have, you don't need to leave comfort of your home. Imagine a world, in order to do task, you don't need to leave a comfort of your home. So, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Where we are today is because what we did in past and what we learned in past, right? Over the 100 years has taught us something. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to fill the gap between physical world and virtual world. How task will be done in future, right? How we distribute the task today in a physical world. How we work with Matt today or Joe today, which you know already, and how I can work tomorrow with Matt and Joe in the cloud, right? Go beyond micro task. Micro task, when I think about micro task, factory connotation comes to mind. That okay, if you want a repetitive same kind of task, and if you want worker not to think about, then it's like a factory assembly line system. But tasks, there are many tasks, and if you want to really realize the potential of these well-connected 3 billion people, then you need to go beyond micro task. Anything that you can outsource can be cloud source, and that I believe in that. And join to contribute.
Next we have Matt Lease. Oh, you're right there. Jeez, he's right behind me. Scared me.
How about window? Try this.
Thanks, Matt.
Top view. Full screen. But it's not up. Okay, thanks.
Hello, is it working? Great. Well, thanks, Mary, for inviting me to be here. I'll be talking about some things that I think are sort of off the beaten track, at least for what's commonly talked about for crowd work. So to start with, for anyone who wasn't at the second session yesterday, we heard Jeff, Hauchi, and Eric talk about a lot of the new kinds of really exciting, innovative applications that crowd work is empowering, specifically micro crowd work. So for example here, you might be over at your friend's house or at Target and you see a chair that looks pretty cool and you wonder, well, you know, I could go buy it here at Target, but I wonder if Amazon has it cheaper. So imagine you could just take a picture of that chair, regardless of the lighting conditions, the angle, the scale, whether things are partially occluding it, and figure out whether Amazon has that chair in stock. So this is something which machine vision can't do right now, but machine vision coupled with crowds can do. So suddenly that means that instead of being bounded in building your intelligent application by what the best state-of-the-art AI can do today, suddenly you are bounded only by human competency. You might have to pay more, you might have to wait longer, but suddenly there's a whole new, very creative, exciting design space for building these kinds of applications for customers. And so this has driven all kinds of really exciting research in all fields of intelligent sort of system design, as well as a lot of startups and applications. But what we talk about a lot less are the people behind this. I'm a computer scientist by training. Most of the work I do is in the statistics of how to sort of ensure that we collect this data from crowds effectively, affordably, cheaply. But who are actually the crowds behind this? Well, we just talked about, there's challenges of matching appropriate workers to the work they do. And actually, one of my graduate students is here on internship this summer, Hyunjun. And so, that's the sort of thing I would normally think about. But who are the crowd behind all this work? Well, there were some surveys that were done a couple years ago about mechanical Turk workers in particular. So we know a bit about their distribution in America and India. We know a bit about their education levels and economics. It's really only in the last year or so that we've started to see some real ethnographic work of trying to understand working conditions. Some of you might have heard of, there's a nonprofit called SamaSource. They actually have political refugees or displaced persons who are sort of have nowhere to go, no chance to earn income. They've set up computer labs, and these people are doing mechanical Turk tasks. The United Nations, and you see here with support by Microsoft and others, are also doing similar things of setting up computer labs. So you have a very diverse ecosystem of people out there who are actually doing this kind of work. And a lot of what makes sort of the microtask work stuff work is because this is an invisible crowd. It scales. It's often anonymous. You don't know who's doing it. But these are kind of some of the people behind it. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about, do we have digital sweatshops? Do we have digital slaves out there doing this work? When you think that people are just doing this because they're bored and they're trying to kill time, or because that this is just extra flash cash they're doing instead of watching a TV show, then you don't worry so much about pay. But we've seen that there's increasing work, particularly in developing nations, where this is being done for primary income. And you can see here, certainly as a group for which this money is actually empowering, as well as the opportunity to take a little bit of agency in terms of their life conditions. So let me turn back and talk about some of the other kinds of tasks that crowdsourcing is enabling. So when you have any new technology, it can be used to do great good, and it can be used for things that are maybe less good. Here's sort of a questionable case. So if you're a popular social network, you probably have terms of use describing what kinds of imagery can be posted that are appropriate. And maybe it's not acceptable for your customers to have to flag inappropriate images. So instead what you do is you in some sense outsource those jobs to the third world. So your job is to look at this kind of imagery and flag it as appropriate or not. And this is something, there was a Gawker story that ran about this 2 years ago. Well, on one hand, this is exactly what human computation is great at, right? Human computation is saying, where is machine vision letting me down? And I can use crowds to perform those tasks for me. But on the other hand, this is exactly the kind of task we don't want people having to do, right? Because people are the ones who are likely to be emotionally or affectively affected by this kind of work. So we have this catch-22 that the very kinds of tasks people are, that human computation is creating are the kinds of tasks we really don't maybe want people to be doing. And this is particularly in the case, if you think about now you combine what the best AI and the crowd work can do. So the AI is filtering out all the images you're pretty confident are fine, and all the crowd worker is seeing is all the images that are borderline. And there are cases of people, for instance, seeing images of people committing suicide and uploading that. There's also all kinds of other stuff, solving CAPTCHAs, SEO, account creation, cybercrime, and now a new age of cyber warfare, where again, these are what people are being involved in to do, tasks behind the scene. Now, who's doing the work? In many cases, right, it's fine. We have people who are doing this to earn the spare income or kill time. But a lot of the problems with this unknown workforce is we don't know who's doing the work, or it could be at-risk populations. So there's cases we know of Chinese prisoners doing gold farming online. This could be refugees, as we just talked about. On one hand, empowering. On one hand, you might feel differently about political refugees doing your work. Children, we just don't know very much often about who's doing the work online. We talk a lot about how to make work more efficient by sort of abstracting the microtask away from the overall task in which the work is being done. So you can think of the Ford factory model for producing a car. You try to have somebody just produce the headlight and not worry about the context. But that's completely at odds with helping people understand how their work is being used in the context of the overall work product that will be produced. So in some sense, we have an inherent tension between trying to not make people aware of the overall task. And people might feel differently, let's say, about labeling images if they knew they're training machine vision system that will be used for the military, or maybe to detect people who are protesters over in Syria. Just because a task is chosen online, we often assume the task is freely chosen, and therefore the person is making a willful decision. But we just don't really know a lot about this. And in general, we know that sort of throughout human history, whenever there is increasing amounts of money at stake, that there will be certain populations who are imposed to do work by others. And there's really nice talk at the Microsoft Faculty Summit 2 years ago from Robert Sim talking about how in general all this fraud online is just really part of organized crime. And in some sense this is just one more component in the larger picture. So we really don't need to think about it sort of on its own. So there's been increasing discussion or awareness in the ACM for thinking about, crowdsourcing on one hand is great. We're enabling blind people to see what's the can of food in front of them. We're creating all these innovative applications, but at the same time, what are sort of the costs that we may not be seeing as well that are harder to detect? And I admit, I just found out this last year, the ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, even has a code of ethics. Isn't that maybe a problem that wasn't in my training? But, so you read here, one of the things they talk about is with the advent of outsourcing and offshoring, financial and economic imperatives, these are often related to ethical issues concerning exploitation. I can't tell you how many crowdsourcing papers I read that are talking about how cheaply we got the data and how great this is, with no discussion about sort of the ethical implications of this kind of work. Another thing computer scientists might hope, we heard somebody say yesterday, was that the law would fix everything. So being in the information school, I had the opportunity to work with a lawyer. And my real concern was we in intelligence systems are building a huge scaffolding of work on this assumption that we'll continue to have this kind of cheap, plentiful data to build our systems. But this is all basically predicated on the fact that these people are independent contractors and not employees, and therefore not subject to minimum wage laws. So we went through and we looked at some of this stuff and saw some reasons why there might be questions about this. And actually since then, now there's class action litigation in the courts that's still pending. The parties came to agreement and the judges rejected it, so it's still back out right now. So there's a lot of questions also about legally what's going on here. And as usual, we have technology sort of ahead of the law. And I don't think just because it's legal, it's ethical. That's something that also came up in the lunchtime discussion yesterday. So when people have talked a lot about how much to pay, it's often covered issues of, again, how much do I need to pay to get quality? How much do I need to pay to get my work done fast? And less about how much do I need to pay to not only provide a living wage potentially, but to make sure that this is a sustainable market of work that we can continue to count on to power our intelligence systems going forward. And Sid and Winter, who will be talking, have written a paper where they talk about, doing human subject studies. It's unclear in a global market with human subjects research, what is fair pay that you should provide your participants? People have said, well, gosh, we're not paying minimum wage. You should just pay nothing. Because if you pay nothing, therefore there's no pay on the table. So in that case, you have a volunteer system or you gamify work, and then you take the work products and you monetize them and you give the participants who provided that data nothing. So is paying nothing really better than paying something? not clear right now. So, what I've tried to do a lot for the last year or two is really just try to find information to help people think about this a little better and promote sort of dissemination and discussion about it. But I think a lot of this is that people will behave in ways that are sort of self-maximizing, and so we should try to work harder on finding win-win solutions where it's in your own best interest to act a certain way. So for example, if you think about what happened with music stealing and iTunes, right? iTunes made it fast, cheap, and easy to actually buy music legally. So can we make it fast, cheap, and easy to figure out what are appropriate wages to pay crowd workers? So we wrote a little API where you can very quickly go and call our API to find out, given an IP address, what's the appropriate minimum wage region in that region of the world. Make it quick and easy to figure out what appropriate pay would be. So very short time here. So I had the great honor to work with a number of people on a paper talking about a lot of these issues and others. So if you're interested, I refer you to this. One issue we heard touched on briefly yesterday, just to say, is I think there's a great future in the intersection of online education and crowd work. So we don't want people in clothing factories in Haiti or clothing factories in Bangladesh that are going to be collapsing, that are dead-end jobs. We want to provide economic ladders such that people can come in and do these kind of entry-level jobs, but then climb up to other areas. And this is one thing we talk about in this paper among a lot of these other issues. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and refer anyone who's interested particularly in issues of ethics and crowd work to take a look at this great site and blog that Six Silberman has set up and join our conversation online. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Winter Mason.
Hi. Can you hear me now? Okay. So that was really nice, Matt. I like that. What Matt was really talking about is something that's a little bit immediate, like what we need to think about right now in order to address the issue of ethics and human workers, like in crowd work right now. What I'm going to talk about is a little bit closer to what Rajesh was talking about, which is sort of a longer-term vision with respect to the future of crowdsourcing and work. And so what I want to start with is this question of what kind of work can be crowdsourced. So this is I just came up with a quick list of crowdsourcing platforms that are commonly used, are often talked about these days. So Mechanical Turk has this standard format of microtasks, anonymous workers. Elance and Odesk is maybe a little bit more, has more of that reputation system, more of that here's Matt, here's Joe type of work, right, where you've actually got profiles and some understanding of the person. Both of those are very online, but you also have these things that are moving into the physical world, still crowdsourcing, like TaskRabbit, GigWalk, and Jara, formerly TextEagle. And of course, I also appreciated that you mentioned gold farming as one way of actual crowd work, like this is something that is actually done. But I want to argue that there's actually another kind of crowdsourcing that is currently being done that is just actually considered typical labor, right? Which is this. Right? So here you actually have a situation in the real world where you have effectively anonymous workers that you hire and you pull from a crowd, right? And you get them to do work. Right? And in fact, what I want to argue today and where I want to sort of nudge the discussion a little bit is that the lines between what we have been conceiving as crowdsourcing actually are blurrier and are more like actually traditional labor than we generally give it credit for. So in this interest, I started thinking, okay, I went to the Bureau of Labor Standards, has this classification system for different types of work in the country. And so I just sort of went through this list and sort of this is not exhaustive, but I went through and put some things and said, okay, well, what is crowdsourced and what is not crowdsourced, right? So currently, in the crowdsource category, you have things service, so you actually see people doing, like on Odesk and Elance, doing sort of administrative work where they're actually maybe answering phone calls or that sort of thing. Of course, technology work, that's a lot of what we see people doing. Maybe like Top Coder is a great example where they're doing web programming and that sort of thing. Management, of course, research and science, that's what a lot of us are doing. You also have Galaxy Zoo as an example of that. Arts and design, you see this with 99 Designs and these crowdsourced design platforms. In the not crowdsourced, of course, you have some ones that really seem like it would be very hard to actually crowdsource, right? So manufacturing, agriculture, construction, forestry, mining, textiles, real estate, banking, healthcare, education, leisure, tourism, right? So this is like not exhaustive, but I tried to capture most of the categories in the ILS in the Bureau of Labor Standards classification. And I want to argue that, like, at least in the nearer future, you could actually see this section of industries also moving over to this section, where these types of industries are also starting to be crowdsourced. So you have apps like Trulia and Zillow for real estate, right? Well, you can imagine that people are actually starting to do the real estate transactions online, and only the very last leg is done in person where you're going to see the house. Banking, of course, you have a lot of online banking that's going on. You have Bank Simple, which is effectively entirely online. And you can see how these different industries might actually take advantage of the sorts of things that crowdsourcing, the advantages that crowdsourcing has. And so in this interest, so in a paper that I have with Mor Naaman and Ronnie Teodoro and others, where we were looking at specifically physical crowdsourcing things, right? And so we came up with this sort of task dimensions that were relevant to the kinds of things that we were studying. And so one dimension was on task complexity, or the expertise that was required. And I think this one is a very important one that definitely applies in regular work, right? So how much task complexity is required, or how much expertise is required to do the job that you have, is actually probably a reasonable determinant of how much pay you're going to get, right? There's different skills, and the level of skill required is definitely one of the key factors in pay. One thing that is not usually thought about in traditional jobs, but of course is thought about a lot in crowdsourcing, is this physical versus virtual dimension, where Mechanical Turk and Fancy Hands are very much on the, and Odesk would also be in that top left corner, are very, virtual, it's online, all of the work is actually done online. And then you have ones that are very physical, so TaskRabbit and GigWalk, you actually have the job to go out and take a picture of prices on the shelf, or to pick up some laundry or something to that effect. I want to argue that there are some other important task dimensions when you start to broaden the concept outside of crowdsourcing and into traditional labor. Things like coordination requirements. So it's not just that you as an individual worker have skills. There's many, many jobs in the real world and in jobs that could potentially be crowdsourced that require coordination between workers, right? So this is why we have organizations. This is why we have organizational structures, because once you get to a certain size, once you get to a certain task complexity, you actually need to have organization in order to get the work done effectively. But there's also other really interesting constraints that we don't normally think about. So when we're putting tasks on Mechanical Turk, one of the things, a lot of the times you see people saying, you need to be a native US worker. One of the reasons is that people generally think, I get better quality work there. But it could just be that there's a big mismatch between sort of the expectations of the task requester and the expectations of the worker, right? So, maybe it's just there's linguistic problems. They don't understand the instructions because it's not their first language, maybe. Or maybe there's cultural constraints where you are asking them to do something that you just assume everybody knows because it's part of your culture. But as soon as you're crossing cultural boundaries, that's not reasonable. And then maybe you have geographic constraints if you're doing one of these physical things like TaskRabbit or GigWalk. Another important thing is technology requirements. This is another assumption we have when we're doing tasks on Mechanical Turk. We assume that they have a computer and that they have computer literacy, right? But when you start to talk about the types of crowdsourcing, such as TextEagle, Jana, Jara, whatever it is, there it's like the only expectation is that they have a flip phone. Right, and so understanding sort of the technology requirements, and these are important when you start to think how can we take advantage of the benefits of crowdsourcing and move it into standard typical labor. So what are some of these benefits? Okay, so what are some of these benefits? You have the fact that you can, from the worker side, they can very easily. There's very little friction going from job to job. Right. So on Mechanical Turk, one of the benefits and one of the things that factors into the ethical considerations of work on Mechanical Turk is that it is assumed that when you're doing a particular task, it is very easy for you to just stop doing that one task and start doing another. Right, learning considerations aside, and you could see this in at least one of the types of workers that Rajesh had. You actually see people that really are going from different types of tasks, giving variety, and presumably that transition is very smooth. When you're talking about real labor, that transition is very rough. There's a thing called frictional unemployment, which is essentially that those people that are between jobs. Right, and so there's almost always some period between jobs in which people are unemployed, and that's because there is this friction moving from one job to another. Another benefit from the task requester side, from the person that is getting the work done, is that you can grab that there is a pool of people, there's always work available, there's less seeking, you don't have to, in Mechanical Turk type tasks, you don't have to worry about the matching and that sort of thing. And I think that there's some hope that regular jobs can start to have this feature where if there is better matching, you can get there. So what I wanted to think about was, well, how can you crowdsource any job? What is actually crowdsourceable? And so, one of the first things that I think about, because this is how I started researching crowdsourcing, is about incentives, and when you're talking about online work, of course you can do things like gamification. You can have badges that get people to participate, and Foursquare has done this to great success, where there's no pay involved, but they get a lot of data collected, and this data is monetizable. And just because people get to be mayor of their local Starbucks or whatever, right? Similarly, similar to that concept, you have the mayor, and so you have you could have leaderboards, Galaxy Zoo or whatever could have something where how many galaxies have you labeled, and are you in the top 10? One that's now increasingly mentioned, and I think is very important, is the community building. Right, so people on Mechanical Turk, the core users, the really active users on Mechanical Turk, definitely feel like they're part of a community. You can also say this about the contributors on Wikipedia. They definitely feel like they're part of a community, right? And of course, you also see the traditional just money, right? And money is how most labor is dealt with. That is probably always going to be the way that most labor happens. But it's worth noticing that the things that we're seeing in the volunteer work and volunteer crowdsourcing is leveraging these non-financial incentives. And there's good reason to believe that there's at least some exchangeability in terms of compensation. So you might be able to pay somebody less if the task is actually enjoyable. And it would be interesting to see whether those sorts of trade-offs actually could get shifted into the real world. Perhaps academia is so enjoyable that people are willing to not earn as much. So this is a figure from Matt Selganic. I actually think that maybe Rajesh's figures would have been better for this, because my point here is simply that, so this is Matt talking about the difference between a traditional survey versus his wiki survey, which is an excellent paper. I highly recommend it. The work is great. But the idea is that when you look at the contributions on, for instance, Wikipedia and on Mechanical Turk, you see this very long tail distribution where a lot of people contribute very lightly. They just have one little edit on a page, and that's essentially all that they ever have done on Wikipedia. And then you have a small core of people that have done lots, and that just, it's their lifeblood, it's what they do, they're part of that community, and they really love it, right? And so Matt specifically, this little gray square in the corner is sort of what is actually accomplished through traditional surveys, where you're just asking everybody to fill out 50 questions, and that's what you ask of everybody. So you're not able to take advantage of the full tail. I would argue that that long tail is actually something that probably applies in the real physical world. When you look at the community of model train builders, right? Very clearly you have this like distribution of interest where you've got a very small set that is willing to spend hours and hours and hours on building model train sets, right? And so if we could actually take real world jobs and start to modify them so that we can capture these types of contributions, we might be able to improve the efficiency of labor in many, many different markets. These 3 points I think are very important in terms of, you know, how do you actually ensure that market is working and that you have that you're able to crowdsource these jobs. This is thanks to Alex Pesakovich. And so one, and a lot of these were mentioned by Rajesh, but number one, you have to have sufficient numbers of workers and jobs. You have to have enough so that the workers know when they come there's going to be a job available for them, and when the people come to get work done, they know that there's going to be somebody there to do the work. It's also important to be able to easily find that match. If everybody, and this is sort of my vision, is that you have like a single marketplace for all jobs, right? And if you had that, right, it's still then you have so many jobs it's going to be very difficult to find it, and so you have to have a good mechanism for finding a match between the workers and the jobs. And then, of course, you need to have safety in the market. You need to be sure that there is an enforced reputation system on both sides, probably insurance. When in the real labor market, there are these sorts of protections that the government provides, and when things are good, and so it's something that would be like very good to have, and something that would be necessary if you want to really bring real labor into this sort of crowdsourcing type environment. And then just 3 other things that I think are sort of important for this. You need to have a legal framework and support. And I think this sort of applies to the current situation as Matt was talking, and also to this sort of long-term vision that I'm describing here. You also need to have, if you really want this to be a global marketplace, then you really need to start having these effective language and cultural bridges, mechanisms by which people can sort of address potential linguistic or cultural differences and find a way to resolve them. And then, of course, I think it's very important to think about access opportunities, and if you are actually to construct this kind of labor market, to ensure that it is not unfairly biased against any particular group, that every group has equal access, because in terms of the ethics, that's something that's going to be very important. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Will be Sid Suri.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Okay. So it's getting late in the afternoon, and it's about that time where I usually get a little sleepy. So I'll start this off. I'm just going to introduce myself, and I'll tell a little story. So my name is Sid Suri, and I'm a computer scientist. What I've been doing since about 08, 09, and many in conjunction with winter, is I try to figure out what can I learn about humanity by crowdsourcing. So how can we take psychological, behavioral economical experiments and put them on crowdsourcing sites? So the participants are subjects, and the experiment is the task. And that's what I did from about 08 through now, and I still do it. And it was about all I did until I met Mary. About a year and a half ago, Mary came up to me, and she said, "Sid, I heard you do a lot of crowdsourcing. I want to do an ethnography of crowdworkers." And I said, "Mary, that sounds awesome. Let's do it. By the way, what's an ethnography?" So we've been at it for about a year and a half now, and I think I can answer that question, although I'm not entirely sure. So what I'm going to talk about today is just our progress so far. Okay, a piece of the progress, not all of it. So as many of you know, many people in this room have done crowdsourcing for a while. So this is kind of how crowdsourcing works, and this is kind of a high-level picture I have up here. What happens is a requester puts a task on a crowdsourcing platform. A platform could be Mechanical Turk, UHRS, Gigwalk, what have you. And then a worker comes and does that task. And the point I'm making with that little diagram is that the API mediates the interaction between the worker and the requester. Okay? So now, again, Mary came up to me. She said she wants to do an ethnography. So she wants to figure out who are the crowd workers and why do they do crowd work. So what she does is she circumvents the API, gets in their living room and interviews them. And doesn't just interview them once, but does so over time, maybe for a year. Okay? Well, I mean, she's not in their living room every day, but you know what I mean. She doesn't move in with them. So that's what she does. And then what I do is I am the requester, and I'm trying to figure out what can I learn about these crowd workers by using the API, sometimes by just using it in vanilla ways, and sometimes by kind of poking holes through it. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, is these two approaches, what we've learned, and how they come together. Okay, so as many of you know, crowdsourcing, and when I'm talking about crowdsourcing in this moment, I'm especially talking about microtasks. Microtasks are work for pay, but not a whole lot more. So if you think about a job, and when I say job, I mean the kind of job that everyone in this room kind of has. The API, crowdsourcing, it generally leaves out a lot of what makes a job a job. So for example, there's no advancement. Largely speaking, there's no advancement in crowdsourcing. There's no employer reputation. There's no larger organization the workers are a part of. Workers generally don't have benefits, often don't have leadership. They get very little or no recognition because it's usually anonymous. There's no identity. Like I said, it's anonymous. They don't have colleagues and they can't collaborate. This API that mediates this interaction strips a lot of this away. One thing, though, that Mary and I observed is that workers and platforms are slowly starting to put some of this stuff back in. Okay? So MobileWorks is a crowdsourcing site, and they allow workers to become managers. That is to say, they allow workers to manage other workers. Mechanical Turk has a version, a similar but different version of this called Masters. Leadership. Some crowdsourcing sites, leadership has emerged among the workers. For example, Spam Girl, she started Turker Nation, which is a forum for Mechanical Turk workers, and she is a de facto leader of that community. Gigwalk has these two individuals who they have a Tumblr site for onboarding new gig walkers. Oh, by the way, if you didn't know, Gigwalk is a mobile crowdsourcing platform where people are often paid to go take pictures of things, like businesses, for example. And they have a site to help workers onboard, get advice, best practices, etc. And then Lily Irani and Six Silberman at UCSD started Turk Opticon so that workers could keep an eye on the reputation of the requesters before they actually do their work. And what I'm going to talk more about today is workers are starting to put collaboration back into crowdsourcing. Forums have sprung up. They collaborate on these forums. They share tasks with each other. They often collaborate on these tasks. They work on these tasks together. And like I said, that's what I'm going to talk more about now. So, like I told you, Mary gets into these people's living rooms and interviews them. And what I've pulled out here is a few quotes from some of these interviews. And to protect anonymity, I changed all the names to famous Bollywood stars. Because all of these quotes come from interviewing Indian workers. So the point I'm making on this slide is workers talk to each other, they teach each other, and they collaborate with each other. So the first quote: I taught Mechanical Turk to my friends. My friends Ashwarya and Priya are earning well. Salman Khan is my guru in MTurk. And there's like, I could have put like 10 other quotes on here. I mean, this is really, really common for them to teach each other. Now, on to collaboration. If we are not here, and the interviewee was talking about, if we are not here sharing tasks, talking with each other and sharing tasks, then MTurk would also not be here. He viewed sharing tasks as so important that MTurk wouldn't be around if they didn't do it. And there's two childhood friends. One of them said, if I'm working and find a good hit, then I call my friend and tell him about it. So I personally would have never thought to measure workers collaborating if Mary hadn't gone there and interviewed them. It would never even occur to me. Okay? So this is the point I'm making. There's requesters on one side of the API. On the other side, there's workers, but there's edges between the workers. And those edges what do those edges mean? Like I said, they're talking to each other, they're teaching each other, and they're collaborating. Why is this important? Why does this matter? It could be that if a worker, so Winter and I are friends, most of the time. So if he, it could be that if he does a task, and it's a lucrative task, he sends it to me. So if Winter does a task, I'm more likely to do the task than some other random worker. So workers aren't independent. So we decided to go out and try to measure this. So what we did was we built a hit A very, very simple hit. I won't give you the details. You could do it in under 30 seconds, and it paid a quarter. And we let it run for 5 weeks. And on the x-axis is the days as time went on. On the y-axis is the number of workers who did our hit. And this is a stacked bar plot. The black parts of the bars indicate how many workers came to our hit from an online forum. So after they did the hit, we just had a little pull-down menu. How did you hear about this hit? One option was online forum. And the light blue parts of these bars were just from searching Mechanical Turk. And what you can see is that, first off, it's very bursty. There's these huge spikes at the beginning, and they're just at random times. And what's driving these spikes? It's posting to the forums. It's about more than 50% of the traffic came from workers posting this hit on the forums. So they really are sharing their tasks, and it really matters a lot. So popping up a level, what I'm saying is crowdsourcing is a little bit less like the top, which is how I thought about it when I first started doing it. On the top, I have a picture of, like Rajesh was saying, a large crowd, faceless crowd, homogeneous crowd of workers. And it's more like tapping into networks of workers. And these workers are individuals. They have things that they're good at and bad at, and these differ. And workers have preferences for tasks, as I've shown here, and preferences for requesters. So, what am I trying to say? Crowdsourcing strips away much of what makes a job. Maybe, perhaps, to increase quality, usability, and enjoyability, we need to restore some of these aspects. And workers and platforms have already started to do this. And now, just as a final point that I'll make that we can talk about more in the discussion part is the fact that the API strips away all but the work and pay, is that entirely bad? And I'll give you 2 examples which indicate maybe it's not entirely bad. The first is, culturally, it can be difficult for women in India to work outside the home. So what Mary and her team have found out is that women are using crowdwork to contribute financially to their houses, but work inside the home. And because the API, no one knows they're women, right? Because the API is anonymous, no one knows they're women. Similarly, in various parts of India, Muslims are discriminated against. It can be hard for them to find a job. But on a crowdsourcing site, because of the API, no one knows they're Muslim. So it's much easier for them to do crowd work. The last thing I'd like to say is this is a very large project with quite a few people. Mary and Rajesh are 2 of my great collaborators. Sarah Kingsley, extremely talented intern, grad student at UMass Amherst. Shoaib and Deepti help us a lot with the interviews in India. This project would not go without them. And Kate's been on the ground in Boston helping Mary out a lot. And if you want to hear more about this project, there's a demo right after this session in the Hood room. And Sarah just made an awesome demo for that, so please come see it.